Can you recapture? I know you had the moment of brilliance.
No. I think that the thing that I was trying to get to was Tim brought up something that I think that we all understand, and it's abundantly clear that we have a huge gap that the market isn't going to solve, right? The free market is not going to help us solve our housing problems from the bottom all the way up to the 1%. We basically have a 99% gap in Park City, and it's not getting easier. The free market is also not going to solve any of our social equity problems right now, because for no fault of their own, the folks who were allowed or who are capable of moving here over the last 18 months just inherently don't need the services that we're trying to provide the community, right? These are people who can afford anything. Second homes in Park City during a pandemic, for God's sakes. So they're not worried about childcare. They're not worried about missing a meal. They're not worried about somebody in dirty sweatpants at the gym, because they have a gym in one of their homes, if not in every one of their homes. So I think it's critical that we're having this conversation and we're expanding our sphere of influence over what is needed in the community. And I think that's a really lively and energetic conversation. And it's not, it's not to be insulting about what we're fearing at the top or what it is, but I think we do need to spread our arms and wrap it around a bigger portion of the community, because 60% or 80% AMI and below, I mean, that is just not going to be enough. That's not going to do anything to really build community in Park City, and the gap is just massive. And so that was really where I was going. It's just that I don't see the free market doing much for us. And so unfortunately, more responsibility is going to land on the municipality to step up. And how much can we step up? What can we do to make differences? And we need to hear some of this positive stuff so we keep moving in the right direction. But to your point, the amount of work that we have to do going forward, not just on housing, but on social equity, on everything, it's probably just going to keep getting bigger. So we got to keep moving forward.
And Max, let me just riff off that a little bit. I don't want to disparage or diminish the outstanding and excellent work that is done within the community through the nonprofit sector to meet the needs of the community in a moment. And we can look back over a decade and look at Live Give PC as something that we are all proud of. We can look at the support for the nonprofits over many decades in this community. And we have tons of nonprofits. Again, everything's relative. You look at other communities our size and they've got one or two nonprofits. We've got over 120 here. They're very active, very vibrant, very engaged in building community, in one way or another. They're each pulling on their own thread or weaving their own thread into the fabric of the community and helping to build community. And what happened in the last year with COVID in response to a crisis and a pandemic was just, it's beyond belief. I mean, the amount of money that was raised from that philanthropic crowd, the people who are moving here are contributing in enormous ways that we have to recognize and acknowledge as well. But we can do both. We can do both. So we have to recognize what the private sector and the free market is not going to be able to do, and what is going to land somewhere. And in that somewhere, we are going to play a role, we being Park City Municipal and the community with taxpayer dollars. And that's what I think we're trying to get to. And at the same time, there's a tremendous amount of benefit that comes to this community through philanthropy and wealth and nonprofit work that has to be recognized at the same time. So, and when I look at all that, I'm like, yeah, we've got huge challenges and struggles, but I'll just come back to where I am. I told Franco as he was going down the stairs that his presentation was incredibly powerful to juxtapose us and put us in, a place that I have limited ability to relate to. I really do. I mean, so I appreciate every moment and opportunity that somebody like Franco comes and puts me in, someone else's shoes, and I'm not completely in someone else's shoes. That would be absurd for me to claim that, but I get a little bit, I get a little ping, I get a little flavor, I get a little taste, and that builds compassion and empathy and understanding. That was powerful. That was incredible. And what makes me proud is that this community not only does a lot of work through traditional philanthropy, but that we also have the courage to continue on this path of peeling back the layers of the onion in social equity. Hand in hand, very proud. If we were doing just one or just the other, it wouldn't mean as much to me, but because we in this is what makes Park City different, special, and unique, in my opinion, is we have the vision to do both, the courage to do both, and we continue to do both. So I'm done.
I think it's, I agree. I hope we continue to do both. I think, because of kind of what's gone on in the national trade as far as like Black Lives Matter and really talking about systems of oppression and how to be anti-racist. I know a lot of us are doing a lot of that work personally. And when you learn about systems of oppression and they exist kind of everywhere in all different industries and levels of government. And I think that it's our responsibility to work to break those systems down in whatever way we can. And there's a lot that our nonprofits can help us with, but there's a lot that we need to be doing internally to making sure that we are addressing those systems when and where they find them, and having other people help us recognize them, in our housing, in our hiring, in our operations. And so I really appreciate what you said about the murals, because there were some people in our community that said we did it wrong. There are people that really politicize the message. But personally, I was very proud that as a community we had that on our streets, because I think that it's something that a lot of us believe in the message that Black Lives Matter, and it's important, especially it's not especially in all communities, to recognize the inequities that exist and strive to do better. And I think maybe we didn't do it right, but I think, to your point, this is uncomfortable and it's hard, and there's not always a right way to do things. And having the social equity as a priority is helping us muddle through it. And I'm glad we're muddling through it one way or another. It's not going to be perfect. Maybe there are some that are doing it better. And hopefully we can reach out and learn from them and find ways to try to move more smoothly through this. But I am proud of the work that we are doing to address those systems that exist in our community, and hopefully we can move through it and continue having these hard conversations and acknowledge what our role as a local municipal government is, and work with our nonprofits and others in our community to address and those issues.
I just don't want it to get lost. This gets lost almost every time the murals come up.
Mhm.
We had Justica para Todos on the bottom of Main Street. We had peace, love, and unity.
Mhm.
We had solidarity, and we had Black Lives Matter.
Mhm.
We had 4 distinct murals. They all resonated,
Mhm.
and the whole conversation was about one of them. I mean, we had people from the Latinx community complaining about a mural, saying that we didn't address anything pertaining to the Latinx community when we had an entire mural dedicated to it and 2 groups of artists that came from that community. So let's just not get lost. That was 25% of the murals that we did, got 100% of the attention. And I want to make sure we highlight that every time we talk about it, because it's really important. Justice for all, come on.
Mhm.
Who's complaining about that? I doubt anybody's gonna raise their hand.
And my anecdotal observation is I have never seen more Black people and people of color visiting Park City than I have seen over the last 12 months. It has been noticeable, clearly, and I don't have any numbers to justify that. I've been ticking anything off on my,
Qualitative.
yeah, it's very qualitative. But I have repeatedly gone through town and said, wow, look at that. a Black person. And it used to be, I would go years in Park City before I would say, wow, there's a Black person on Main Street. And then, and there's a Black family, and here's a Black couple. And I'm like, this is amazing. And it gets back to what came up in the LGBTQIA plus conversation that we had at our last meeting, which is these beacons, these, beacons of hope and aspiration and possibility and welcoming, which all adds up to belonging. And those murals were a beacon of belonging that told people that they can come here and feel like they belong. And more people from groups that we have not seen in the past are all over Main Street, going to our restaurants. And I heard that the murals were going to scare people away and we were going to have a horrible July until September 1st, when everybody on Main Street was going, we had the best July ever. And maybe it wasn't everybody, but you know what? It was a lot of people who were saying that. And I don't think those murals diminished traffic, scared anybody away. I think they drew people because they were a beacon of belonging and welcome and hope, and that drew people to Main Street. And if we're talking about inclusion and diversity and vibrancy, that's what we want, and I think that's what we got.
I think Matt has something to add.
Come on in.
Well, no, I guess I thank you for raising it. I think it's an important discussion, and I appreciate that we sort of have the courage to talk about it. I think at a staff level, we're torn as well because we felt that we were moving forward on a global messages of hope and solidarity and transformation and systemic change. But there were some mistakes along the way. And I think that there's some people in the community that want that acknowledged, or they want that responsibility to be acknowledged or to be on someone's shoulders. So I think it's my job from the staff level to accept that. I'm sitting across from our police chief, and if you were living this summer and you were watching the Black Lives Matter movement, there was a lot of conflict with law enforcement in general. And so, clearly we caught our own police chief off guard, not through having any bad intentions, just, we were moving fast. It was July 4th weekend. We also caught some of our businesses on Main Street off guard. Now, I don't think, if I was just looking at sales taxes, to your point, that had any negative effect. I mean, sales taxes exceeded everyone's expectations. But at an interpersonal level, with some of our stakeholders and some of our partners, and even internally, by moving fast, we clearly caught some people off guard. And I don't want to overlook that. We need to acknowledge that. And I think we're going to learn from that and try to make sure that those types of things don't happen again. When we started this discussion, we said from time to time we may trip, slip, stumble, or fall. I'm not suggesting we fell, but I'm suggesting we absolutely, if we had to go back and do that again, we would do it differently. We would want to create a vehicle where ahead of time people were informed, they had an opportunity for input, and they felt safe getting that input. We heard that too. Right, wrong, or indifferent, that people didn't feel welcome to come in and say they disagreed with it, or they disagreed with the message, or they disagreed with how we did it. So if that helps at all, I mean, just to own it a little bit, yes, we would go back and we would likely do it differently. I can say that unequivocally as staff. We would probably try to have a work session, or we would amplify the message. I don't know if that would have changed the outcome. I don't think that's my job, is to derive suggest it might have changed your policy outcome. But if people want to talk about that, or people need someone to take ownership for it, I will acknowledge that we'd likely do it a little bit differently. And those two are the ones that stick out for us, or those three. Probably had some more community input before we did it, because there were some things that we needed to discuss. We clearly wouldn't surprise our police chief, who was out there that day working hard. And if you look at our police officers, they were helping the artists. They were making sure that they were protected at the same time that our police officers were getting yelled at. And then some of our business owners on kind of an iconic holiday in Park City were surprised. And so clearly that's on my shoulders in terms of representing staff and being the city manager. And so I accept that responsibility, and I'm willing to talk about it. So just thought it's good to put that out there. And Wade, I'm glad you're here too, because it's nice to have you at the table. But I thank you for your willingness to discuss it.
Matt, I'm going to start with ditto. I agree with everything you just said. in particular, I do want to acknowledge, I mean, we did surprise our police and for that, you know, above all, for that, I regret the way that went down. And, you know, I think it actually ended up being kind of a good opportunity because the police were having a memorial on the street. And, you know, at the moment we realized we surprised them, I was also supposed to go speak to them. And we got to have a conversation about it with our officers. And, you know, throughout the next couple of weeks, I think those were ongoing. And it was enlightening. And I would say it probably led to a mutual understanding between maybe some of what council was trying to forward in terms of our goals and how that was being interpreted. That being said, sometimes on these issues, I think it's unrealistic to expect perfection. And when issues are inflammatory, often it becomes about the process. When it isn't really about the process, it's about the issue. So yes, I agree. We should have done better. Yes, I agree. Next time we will do better. But I spent the next couple of months talking to the mayor of Crested Butte, and they ended up doing the same thing. And I told him everything that we would have done differently, and they did everything differently. And it was the same flashpoint in the community. At the end of the day, the same people were offended. You know, there was a group of people that were offended for many of the same reasons. And my only point of bringing it up is I think that's an unfinished conversation in this community. I think it very quickly got politicized, therefore it got taken off the menu. And I think it was about values. I don't think there was a word that was written on the street that is not something that we as a community should embrace. It all became about the national debate about the organization of Black Lives Matter, which I don't think we had any intention of supporting an organization. It was about the community values we wanted to talk about.
And I think that's the whole bottom line though. It's just, we inadvertently stumbled into one thing that had two very distinct meanings to different people in the country and in Park City. If you had, as you were talking about, if you'd stopped at the bottom three, love, justice, you know, it's like, no, everybody would have been happy. You still probably would have had a little pushback from the store owners who didn't know that anybody was going to be out drawing in front of their store. That was an oops. But it literally, I don't think the debate was about Black Lives Matter as a social equity concept. It was half the people looked at it and went social equity concept, and half the people looked at it and went organization that is causing protests and riots and hates the police or whatever it is they felt. And everybody was looking at the same thing. And it just happened to be that. If there was one more at the top of the street that said, everybody hold hands and be lovely together, it would have been a great weekend. You know, so to me, the thing I walked away with is, yeah, double check your content. And don't always think about it from the way you meant it. Think about it from the way somebody else might interpret it. Everything else I look at, it's like, yeah, we probably should have given the HPCA a better heads up. Fine, done. You know, that's it. It's just
And I think that's well put, Steve. And again, that's why I say ditto. I think, you know, everything that laid out there, we have things to apologize and that we could have done it better. But I just think we should continue the conversation. I don't think we should pretend it never happened because there were mistakes made because maybe we had we missed some things.
Well, I've been the vocal one, obviously, about the process, and the process was flawed. And I appreciate you taking ownership of that and you know, learning from that and for future things. But I think it also highlights that the community, there wasn't a mechanism for the community to have the conversations. And there still isn't. And those are tough conversations to have. And I think if we're going to throw out some inflammatory things or talk about social equity, but those are messy conversations, and we need the tools to be able to do that. I've had so many people, I hear about those murals every week still, and that's almost a year later. And people wouldn't come forward because they didn't want to be labeled. They didn't want to be shamed. They didn't want to be labeled a racist or whatever for not being comfortable with what was going on. And so I'm excited about the cohort that the Community Foundation is doing, because I think that's going to provide a toolbox, provide us with some tools to be able to have those conversations. But I think we need, as we're thinking about doing things like that in the future that we know are going to be potentially inflammatory, what tools do we have in place? What mechanisms do we have in place for the community to have a conversation about it instead of just shutting it down, and then it keeps coming up again and again and again.
But how many people do you ever find? I mean, there is systemic racism. And I mean, we can have a debate about that, but I'll win that one. There is systemic racism. I'll just lay that one out as a fact. There is systemic racism. And it's other than, maybe in the southeast of the country or something, it's hard to find people who will stand up and go, yeah, I'm a big believer in racism, and here's why. Here's what I'm going to stand behind. It's when you talk about these debates and things, I mean, I think fundamentally the issue was you had one picture on the ground and two different expectations of what that was really representing. But you're not going to have, I mean, Tim's brought this up 1,000 times. We try to encourage discussion in the community, and you're just not going to have somebody come out and go, yeah, I really don't like Black people. In fact, I don't like anybody but white people, and here's why I believe that. No one's going to come forward and take that position publicly, even if they adamantly believe it. And I believe there are some people who adamantly believe it. And but they're not going to show up. I don't care whether it's the community foundation or the church or us or anybody. They're not going to stand up and say that in public, and they never have.
At the risk of the rabbit hole, right? One of the hardest things that I've heard over the last 12 months regarding this conversation is, and man, I apologize for this, but the concept that this is a conversation about process fits so perfectly into a systemic racism box that it's just impossible for me to overlook. When the complaint is process, but the problem is the message, we have completely missed the point. And the complaint about process is a bullshit scapegoat for not liking the message and not being willing to say so publicly. And so I'm sorry, processes are inherently flawed. We have mistakes in process on so many different little things. We have to go back and, I mean, just in the year I've been here, I've been like, oh man, maybe we should tweak that. Maybe we should tweak this. This is 100% about message. And for it to be a process conversation, frankly, it's insulting to my family. It's insulting to the artists. It's insulting to the people who tried to put this thing together in an honest way. And to claim in any way that it was like, I don't know, the crap we're seeing on Facebook, it's borderline conspiracy theory. It's like, what in the world are we talking about? After we did this, we had a couple, what did we call them? Round tables with the artists, with the people who chose to do it. They were very emotional. And I just fundamentally think that that is what the community worldwide, nationwide has said, this is what should happen. We need to have these conversations. We want to have a seat at the table, which is what we're talking about here. And they got a seat. I don't believe they would have had we been like, hey, we kind of want to do this thing. Nobody's going to come and raise their hand. And Al-Jay, who did the painting, he's not going to raise his hand to say, I'm going to come up to Park City and talk to you about my life experience as an immigrant who identifies as a Black person. But if you took his DNA test, who knows, right? I mean, I just think it's like, you're not going to get there. And so if occasionally we have to do something to get you there, not you, but all of us, I'm all for it. And I think that the whole process conversation is flawed inherently. I think it distracts from the real work that these people have all been working so hard at. If they're gummed up with process conversation, we're screwed. We are never going to get anywhere. So I appreciate you taking a little accountability. I really do. I think that that's necessary. I think you would do that if we were talking about a plat amendment, right? But nobody would give a shit.
Can I add something real quickly?
Please.
I think the real issue was not so much process, as the communication or lack thereof. And I think we've had that conversation openly and honestly. And one thing I do appreciate, this is the third jurisdiction I've been a police chief in. And I have lots of interaction internationally with other police chiefs. So I've had this conversation. So I see things from a very different perspective, being able to travel to, I just left Alabama and Grange, Georgia, and Savannah. And so having conversations with chiefs in those areas, I think the bottom line that we always come back to is when you're trying to look out for the health, safety, and welfare of the community, at the end of the day, we got to know what's happening. We got to know what to prepare our people for, what to prepare the community for. At the end of the day, we recognize we hire officers that recognize the need of this community. And whatever the council's will is, we're okay with that. What our responsibility is to be able to communicate that appropriately so that when we're receiving phone calls from Main Street Business Alliance or others that have concerns, that I have an intelligent answer to support the council, the mayor, and the objectives of the community. When I don't have that, that's a problem. And so that was, and to be able to tell my officers, hey, this is not a slight, they're seeing a whole different side. They're seeing riots and protests, and our officers are receiving hate mail literally with pictures that said, here's a picture of a good cop and has a cop's head blown all over. That's what my officers are seeing internally. And these are the pieces that the community doesn't understand. These are what I see for my officers when they go home and their families are torn apart, saying, why does the community hate me? Not our community, gratefully, but I think my job is to be honest with you. And the only way I can do that is if you communicate with me. And when you do, I'm an open book, good or bad. I recognize that. And I appreciate the fact that when I grabbed the mayor and the city manager and said, I got to talk. I need to know that I'm in the right spot. I need to know that you guys have my back. I need to know that we can talk honestly. And if I'm upset about something, I want to know that I can share that with you and not worry about the outcomes. And I have appreciated the fact that you've done that. I appreciate Matt's ownership on this too. I'm in a very unique position because I have a lot of relationships within this entire community. I walk Main all the time. I know it. You guys live on Main. We're all invested in this. We're a big family with a lot of dysfunction as family partners, but that doesn't mean we don't love each other. And that's how I feel. I mean, I love this community. And so it breaks my heart when we're torn apart, because we can communicate better, we can do better. And at the end of the day, that's what I want. That's what you all want. I know that. And I always tell people that at the end of the day, the community wants the same thing. We just got to communicate it. So thank you for that.
Thanks, Rick.
It's well put, Chief.
So Nan, we've heard from you a number of times lately, frustration that you feel like there are people in the community that don't want to speak out because they don't think it's safe and they don't think they're heard. You and I are in the cohort program having these discussions, but that's 40 people that all are on the same page. And so, we're again, in theory, we're being trained to help with these conversations, but I got a feeling most of those conversations are going to be with other people that are already sympathetic here. So I will throw out to you, just how do you think we talk to these other groups, the ones that you say are uncomfortable? What are the actual barriers that are making them uncomfortable to have these as community conversations or to reach out to us? I know I got a lot of uninhibited feedback from people in the community. But if you could be more specific, I think that could help us get to maybe how we broaden our circle of people in the conversation.
Well, I think from what I understand, one of the outcomes is supposed to be coming from these cohorts are the tools to be able to facilitate those conversations. Because, even, talking with Diego and other folks at the Community Foundation that are bringing in this Center for Equity and Inclusion out of Portland, they're really not sure they have the skills either to be able to communicate those community-wide. And that's why I think these cohorts are gonna be great, because there will be a group of us that are trained to be able to have these conversations and to make people feel welcome and make people feel like their voices are gonna matter. You know, I think the folks that are consistently reaching out to me on a variety of subjects are, they feel that I've heard the city will retaliate against them, which always confuses me because I can't figure out how the city can retaliate against citizens, but that's their perception, and I honor that. And I'm hearing from people that they feel like they'll be publicly shamed if they come forward with their opinions. Because my first response to them is, I wish you would email the council with your thoughts. And here's the council's email, and they're like, no, I'm not publicly to do that. So again, I have great hope for the skills that we're going to learn from this cohort. But there are residents here that don't feel comfortable even sending an email to us, let alone speaking.
Stuff.
Just like,
Yeah.
That's tough. If you want to have a conversation that includes everybody, you have to include everybody. You have to make everybody feel comfortable. And I think there are so many groups that have forever felt marginalized, right? That have not felt comfortable reaching out. We've heard from some of them today. Flat out come from a different culture. They don't feel comfortable reaching out to Wade because he's a police officer, because where they come from, it's corrupt, right? So it's not just that political perspective that's been alienated. And so I think it's really great that the two of you are trying to figure out how to make sure that you can have all those people at the same table. Everybody gets a seat so that they can express what they feel. But that is a big.
And
Well,
that
there's
was-
the training aspect, which trains the cohort to be able to facilitate, but it doesn't answer the question of, is that enough? If you're facilitated and trained, does that make people who feel unwelcome, does that shift the needle for them to feel welcome? Because that's the question.
Yeah.
And it's not how well you're trained, unless you being trained differently
helps to engage them.
helps them to feel like they can now send an email, have a broader conversation, not selectively with you, but with the council and with the community. Because if they're just selectively having a conversation with you, it's not all that effective.
No, it's not.
Well, and let's also acknowledge that, a lot of people, we're seeing a lot of this on social media. It doesn't matter if they have the freedom to communicate, unless everybody agrees with their position, they're not going to consider themselves having been heard, right? And they just get louder and louder and louder. But their position doesn't actually come to a place where everybody can agree. At least that's what I feel like we're seeing on a lot of these Facebook groups in Park City, is it's just getting just the same message is louder and louder and louder. And the accusation that the city isn't listening gets louder and louder and louder. It's like, you've been saying the same thing for a year. We're not going to agree with that particular perspective.
If you think back to when the Community Foundation came up with the strategic plan for social equity, and they tried really hard to engage people from all different segments of the community, and they did on many levels, but it was very frustrating. I think we even talked about it as a council. How do you get the voices of the people that don't think there's an issue with social equity, that don't think that the city should be even talking about it, that don't think the city should be investing any resources in it? How do you bring those voices together? And honestly, we put an ad in the paper, if you don't like social equity, come to a meeting. Nobody's gonna come. And really. And so those voices are missing from the strategic plan that we did, that the Community Foundation did on social equity, and that was a reason.
It's disappointing because there's at least some basic tools that were used in that and they're used in like our visioning and things like that, where there's, it wasn't just all face to face. There were anonymous surveys and things like that, that, if you kind of didn't want to stand up in front of the community and voice your opinion, you could still voice your opinion. And even that didn't happen. So I don't know whether that was just lack of desire or it's not really the right tool. But I mean, there's something to be said for providing people with anonymity where you can still kind of voice your opinion and have it be heard. But that hasn't worked either. So I don't know what it is. And I don't know what to pass that.
Yeah, I'm worried if we're putting all of our eggs in the cohort basket, because unless that training takes a steep left turn, it's really just teaching us how we can facilitate small groups to have these conversations and help people be more comfortable in those conversations, in terms of like, how do we broaden the net and make people comfortable that have been uncomfortable and frankly have self-exiled for whatever reason. How we bring them together to have these conversations, I don't think we're going to get that out of the cohort.
Well, I
So that's
specifically asked, and they said yes. So,
I mean, that's what I'd like to see us talk about is how do we widen the circle and how do we depoliticize the conversation? Because again, we can talk about what we would do differently if we did the murals today, but at the end of the day, we were trying to have a values conversation that coming out of the visioning, I think 85% of the folks in the community said, we want to have this conversation. And then as soon as we start the conversation, it becomes down to, well, you did it wrong. There is no way to comfortably have that conversation. I don't think there is a way to do it right. So that's what I'd like to get to. And I think there is training we can do that can help us be better at it. But it still, to me, isn't clear how we broaden that circle and how we have these uncomfortable conversations in a constructive manner. We found out how to do them in a non-constructive manner, or at least for some folks.
I was gonna say, it's interesting that people don't feel comfortable writing us emails, because I feel like we certainly got a lot of emails.
That's a surprise to me.
And, but it is hard when, to back to the seat thing, where we are inviting people to the table, we're asking people to come and share with us. And I think that that's kind of maybe the point of having elected officials, is that different people feel comfortable speaking with different people and bringing that perspective to the table. But it's hard if there are a lot of people that haven't been invited to the table, maybe, or feel like they haven't because of language barriers or different socioeconomic statuses. And then there are those that we are continuously asking to come, and then, for one reason or another, don't feel comfortable. And at some point in time, it's really hard because, they do have people they obviously feel comfortable speaking to, but we can only work with what we're hearing. And so from the most of the community, what we're hearing from people that are comfortable telling us what they feel, they're telling us that they want us to go in this direction. And so it's hard. I mean, I understand that we need to hear from everybody, but at the same time, when we ask people to share, they don't actively share it. I don't think that it's hard for people to argue that with the direction we're going.
At some point, we know that fundamentally, there's absolutely no thing we ever do down to like which day the parade of July 4th is going to be on or anything, that's going to get more than about 75% of the population. So at some point, we just had the discussion yesterday and a little bit today. We got to move forward, bold action, got to move the needle, got to make change. And part of that is, you don't spend but so much time. If the answer is you got 70-80% of the population telling you to go this way, listen to the 20, don't ignore the 20, but don't stop what you're doing to see if you can bring it and get it to 100, because the answer is there is no 100. And we know that in everything we do. So, I look at it and go refine it and move on. We know we have a fundamental social equity problem in town, and hopefully we can do a lot of things to make it better, and let's have at it.
What I find encouraging is that, in 2018, when we made this a critical priority, you never heard about social equity in the community. You did in the nonprofit sector, but, as part of the community conversation, you just didn't hear a lot about it. And I hear it all the time. People will use it just in conversation. You see it in letters to the editor and stuff. So I think I think the concept is slowly embedding itself in the community, and I'm really proud of that.
I have a request. I don't want to derail this conversation, but we have a whole bunch of people back here who work a lot on social equity issues. Not just the people we heard from up here, but we have some boots on the ground folks. We have some people who have spent a lot of time, energy, and effort. And I was wondering if there was any interest here, this group, to hear from people in the room toward the back. And if there was any interest in people from the back, excluding Linware Peak, who I am separating out. She will use up all the airtime. If there's anybody in the back who would like to join Matt Dias, who's been courageous enough to step up here, any interest in doing that from council?
And I would, yes, Tim, and thanks for segueing, because I did want I think there are some folks from the public that like to give a little input, and we wanted to make time for that. So let's both invite the public to raise their hand on Zoom if they want to speak, and invite anybody from the back that would like to speak. And Lynn, you're welcome to come speak. I will set my timer at 5 minutes. And we're good to go. Come on up. If anybody that wants to speak, come up here, because nobody can hear you unless you're near the owl.
But if someone on Zoom, so a member of the public chimes in before me, then I'll walk slowly, then they can go. So, there's someone? So obviously, I mean, this conversation that we're all listening to, we realize that we have all learned so much in the last couple of years since we made social equity a critical priority. And, you know, a lot of times we're winging it. I mean, when Leah and I started the LGBTQIA+, Jason, we'll quiz you on that later, task force, you know, I kind of kicked it off, and then suddenly we heard, well, you can't just have an ally lead this task force. And so we said, great, we're going to pass it on to a member of the LGBTQIA+ community. And it's been going great. And, you know, we talk about, should the city be the hub or should it be the community? And initially we kind of thought the community should be. But I would argue that we are the de facto or the default hub. Why? I don't know, but one of the things that Leah and I have been saying.
That was a shock. Didn't see that coming.
Well, one of the things we've been saying is that the community said, you know, we tried to start this little LGBTQ group a couple years ago, but, you know, people move in and out of town. And we said, well, this is, you know, we're here in the city, we're paid to do this work. So guess what? Once we make a commitment to it, it's not going to go away. And consequently, now we have, you know, Leah's going to bring next week to council a great, some great ideas for what we want to do for Pride Month. So be ready for that. And, you know, but at the same time, we're all just kind of learning as we go. And I think that there's something about, well, the other day I was at a communities of care meeting. Holy Cross Ministries was there, and I was bragging about Elise and Haiti doing the rental assistance at Iron Horse, or at Aspen Villas. And I told them, hey, we're going to take it to Iron Horse next because we have this whole model set up. And so last night we served 150 people. So about 30 families showed up. So many families. It takes a half an hour to do each application. So we said, listen, we can't help everyone tonight. We're going to come back next Tuesday and next Thursday, and we're going to help everyone. And, you know, we talked about that at Communities That Care. And yesterday I get a message from Holy Cross Ministries, who was at that meeting, saying, oh, you know, a client of mine called me to see if this was a real thing or if this was a scam. But I knew, because we heard at Communities That Care, that it was a real thing. And I told her, yes, it's good. And it's this kind of collaboration that there's something about what we do at the city that, you know, it just contributes to that sort of thing happening. And it makes us that default hub. But as we've talked about, we are learning as we go, and some of us have skills and some of us are developing skills. But that would be my argument for, you know, a department or a, what else were we calling it? What was the question up here, Ken? Do we have a position?
Yeah.
A social equity position? I think it's time for that because we are a hub and, you know, and we're going to continue to be. And I just have to tell you one really quick story, then I'll be quiet.
Have I heard this already?
Probably. No, this happened the other night. So as you know, we started up this, not only the Spanish Facebook page, but this monthly live panel that we do in Spanish called Mensaje a la Comunidad. And we collaborated with Connect Summit County because they came to us and said, listen, you guys do this every month. Everyone knows it's happening. Can we do this, the mental health and the family presentation? So we came together, Enrique moderated, and right afterwards, this was on Wednesday, and right afterwards, I went to the store and I'm kind of walking up in my own little world and I hear someone starting to speak to me in Spanish. ¿Cómo puede ser que estás aquí enfrente de mí? Yeah, estás aquí en mi teléfono. So she's saying like, how can it be that you're right here in front of me, but you're on my phone at the same time? Well, she was the cashier and she was listening to that Facebook Live. You know, it had finished, but we get thousands of views afterwards. She's, you know, it's a slow moment at Park City Market and she's listening to it. And so we are accessing the community, and maybe we're doing it in a grassroots way, you know, showing up an Iron Horse and helping them fill out applications, but we are doing it, and we are creating a hub. So I don't know. There's my 2 cents. Thank you.
Thanks, Lynn. Hey, and thanks for being part of the solution. I mean, you put your heart into this as a council member and you committed us down this thorny road. And for that, I thank you and curse you. But you have put your actions have supported that. Even when you left council, you jumped in and you've been helping us. So I know everybody in this room has made a difference, but you really have been a leader and you pushed us. And I think we're better because of it. So thank you.
Thanks. Well, it's fun work. It's so rewarding. Yeah.
Do we have anybody on Zoom that wanted to weigh in?
Anything in the chat?
Yes, we do. We actually have a comment submitted by Rich Wyman. He has a question: why do 5 or more police officers show up for the slightest incident, immediately escalating any situation?
I think that's a question that's probably most appropriate for a chief who had to step out for another meeting. So, Rich, if you would like, we're happy to connect you with Chief Carpenter and we can get, we can have that discussion.
What was the question?
The concern was, he said, why is it every time there's an instance, 5 police officers show up and escalate it? And I think, I think all of us went through actually a little bit of de-escalation training, which is pretty impressive and gives you a lot of empathy for the process. But I think the chief could probably better answer. It sounds like it's a specific circumstance Rich is referring to. I have no idea what the circumstances were. Anyone else on Zoom? Anyone else out there that wants to weigh in? Okay, come on up. Yeah, if you don't mind, stand in front of the owl. Got good colors for Zoom.
Okay, great. That's what I was going for. I just want to say I've been at home listening to the social equity cohort conversation or social equity conversation. And I'm so proud of our community, of this council, of staff for taking up this critical priority and really energizing it. From where I sit in my little nonprofit, Communities That Care, I have been watching, as Lynn has also spoken to and Nan has spoken to, how it's in the conversation everywhere I go. Cats Amsterdam Foundation, Rob Katz, had a hour-long conversation about what they are doing internally at Vail Resorts when it comes to race equity within the organization, not just equity in general. They've done a lot of work on gender equity, but specifically calling out race equity and the deep work that they're doing there. So to see that within one of our largest employers, I work closely with the Park City School District, and equity work runs through every single thing that the school district does, from curriculum to staffing to providing services to just throughout. And in the hub of the ecosystem of the community foundation and all the various nonprofits, it is becoming embedded in the work, in the training, in the, in the goals, in the measurement tools. And so, in considering, should the city have a department or a staff person, Brene Brown in her Dare to Lead podcast talks about she will not do equity work with an organization unless they have someone at a high level in that organization who is owning it, because it's the only way that they really see it driven out through the organization. And that being said, to your point, Lynn, about what could be, the hub, there are many hubs. There's the hub of the Chamber of Commerce, and they're doing equity work. There's the hub of the school district. There's the hub of Park City Municipal. There's the hub of the Community Foundation. And so I just offer that we're seeing it everywhere, and that all these organizations are owning it. And I think the leadership of Park City Municipal is absolutely essential and has brought it to the fore and expanded it into the community. So I just wanted to offer that.
Thank you.
Another question from the community?
Yeah.
Sarah Berry. Sarah, your mic is unmuted.
Hi, everyone.
Hi there.
Hi, Sarah, go ahead.
Yeah, it's. Sarah's muted.
Sarah, you were there for a minute.
Oh,
There you go.
hi. Hi. Can you hear
Hi,
me?
we can hear you now, Sarah.
I'm like pulled over on 80. So I mean like to the side of the road because so I've been listening and
Blinkers on.
I no, I'm like off. I'm off on a exit. I think that there's like many more bigger conversations to have. I want to first of all thank Matt so much for acknowledging that there was a misstep regarding these murals. I think that there's a lot to have to go on about this, but very specifically in this comment, I wish that acknowledgement happened a year ago. I think that nobody could be expected to get this right. I would like to state that as somebody that has a problem with the murals in process, I fully support the Black Lives Matter movement. And I would venture to say, I think all on council and staff do as well. So I don't think the argument is there. But what I really want to point out is that we, a community of mostly white people, and specifically this council, you're all white, Jocelyn's white, I think what we're missing here is because what we may have meant by it is not what happened. We didn't listen to the actual Black Lives Matter people. And that's how we wound up getting into this situation, right? It's not that our hearts weren't in the right place. It's not that we weren't trying to do the right thing. But when you go ahead as a person that's not involved or get counsel from Black Lives Matter, that's where we run into a problem. And I think that has to be the acknowledgement. And that's where I think the process went wrong. My assumption, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that it's not like the Black Lives Matter mural was a big surprise, like, ooh, that's what he painted. I would imagine someone somewhere, that conversation would have happened before, its unveiling. So the fact that whatever your intent was, or the city's intent was, didn't come to fruition, I think the failure there is, again, not specifically reaching out to Black Lives Matter and talking to them. And that's how we have the misstep. And that can be rectified, but I think that's the problem of process is we didn't go through the right process. We didn't go through the right channels. And that's why we're here. Not because anybody necessarily, for my sake anyway, disagrees with the message.
Thanks for the feedback, Sarah. And I do want to, you had talked about there being a lack of discussion or apologies on this. And I just want to point out, I did have a fairly extensive meeting with the head of Black Lives Matter for Utah, Lex Scott, and walked through a lot of these issues with her. And it was fairly educational. So there was some follow-up and acknowledgement that these things could have been handled differently.
So, and I'm so sorry you cut, I didn't hear the first part of your comment back. It was frozen. I guess what I'm talking about was before it was done, but I didn't hear your comment, unfortunately.
Thank you.
Well, I just like to throw out, just to be clear, because there's been a lot of process discussion here. The council did not go looking for a Black Lives Matter mural. The council went to the Park City, Summit County arts guys and said, hey, we'd like to do this thing for social equity. And what we asked for was social equity topics. And they went out and found artists and said, what would you like to do for social equity? And that's what happened. And so I just want to be clear, because there seems to be confusion that council sat there and said, we want a Black Lives Matter mural, and went and found somebody to do that. And there's the question of, did we find the right person to do that? And did we do it in, cahoots with the Black Lives Matter movement and everything? Just so everybody really understands, we wanted social equity murals. And if you look from the top of the street to the bottom of the street, I think that's what you saw. And it was the artists who came forward and said, this is how I would like to convey social equity in my drawing on the street. And just because that doesn't quite sync up with what we just heard there. And I think there's been a lot of confusion.
But to be clear, the council didn't reach out, the city did.
The city did, yeah.
And
Well, the council
But the council
approved, and it
approved.
was actually specifically, it wasn't social equity, it was racial equity, because
Oh,
that was
sorry.
the topic du jour.
Yep.
But council was in the loop,
Yep.
and there were no
We
objections.
never
on it.
discussed it as a council.
We did not have a meeting on it. Yes, we were moving quickly, trying to come up with something to replace the canceled activities on July 4th. The week before, we threw flowers on the street, paintings up. That wasn't something we felt we needed to clear through council. Council was notified in advance. We were doing the murals. There was discussion, and there was discussion about them being racial equities. Getting into the details, none of us knew what we were going to have until the morning of. We left it up to the artists to put their interpretation based on how they identify and how they feel.
And here's the really good news. Now, 3 more people in the community understand how we got there. And this has been explained 10 times over the last year. I mean, that same explanation has been given 10 times. And if we give it 10 more times, maybe we'll have 30 more people that understand it, because this is unbelievable. I mean, we continue to walk the community through this, what the process was, how we got there. And we continue to get this sort of narrative that's out there. It's stunning to me. Nothing has sucked up more energy, time, and effort than the murals, than the racial equity murals on Main Street. And I look around and I go, I open up my Northwestern newsletter, and it's like, NU alumni for social equity. I read the message from the spokesperson for the Mormon Church, and he's like, Black Lives Matter. That's a message we can all get behind and support. And I'm like, it's everywhere. And here we are a year later having this conversation on these murals, when what we chose to do, in my opinion, is not censor artistic expression. That's how I see it. I made a very conscious choice. When I got the email and said, do you have any concerns about this? I was like, I don't have concerns about this. These are artists coming to our community to do murals on Main Street, and it'll be artistic expression of a theme. Great. Go do it. And I will stand by that today, and I'll stand by that tomorrow.
And to think that you're, in that moment, you're asking for a theme of racial equity out of artists, street artists, and you commissioned a person who identifies as a Black person, I'm sorry, but the naivety to think that some element of BLM is going to be a part of that, I can't, I'm lost on that. So
Yeah, Matt.
Could I try to bring it home? Just
Yeah, I kind of wanted to put my head together with you. We're cutting deep into authentic local culture, and we need to either end this or we need to rearrange.
Yeah, well,
Hopefully that's where you're going.
I feel like this bleeds into it.
that, you know, this.
What?
Excuse me, I'm sorry, and there is one more public comment.
Want to do that first? The public comment?
It depends on where you're going.
I was gonna try to bring it home, and then we were gonna move into the next pillar, but I was gonna do so in a way that acknowledged the discussion.
Okay, let's take our one more piece of public input.
Okay, and it's not that I wanna, finish the discussion, rabbit holes, deep dives, this was a deep dive, so.
Yeah, I
This
mean,
was a
I
wordy
think
discussion
unfortunately,
and
this is
opening
a
up.
scab we kind of need to pull off. It's been a frustration to the community,
I
and
agree.
clearly we all want to talk about it. So.
Public comment from Angela Sketa. Angela, please go ahead with your comment.
Hi, as I'm sure all of you on council and staff know, I have had many opinions about everything from the beginnings of our social equity discussion in this community right up until where we are now. And I have to tell you, I have never, ever been more deeply offended. I would even use the words disappointed and disgusted with what I am hearing. I was not prepared to speak today. I will not be silenced going forward, despite the fact that Councillor Max Doylany and others would like to continue calling me or other people who are speaking out on Facebook, conspiracy theorists. You have used the word haters at City Council, Max. You have used it multiple times. I really think that there is a complete lack of humility that is regularly on display and is preventing some of you from coming to the kind of understanding that would not just benefit you as individuals, but would benefit this community dialogue that you have an obligation to hold in an ethical, honest, transparent, and truly supportive way out of obligation for all of the people who voted for you or didn't. I will say with certainty, the artist All J does not identify as Black, no matter how Jocelyn tried to lead him to that water to drink it, and you saying it now, Max. He is a Pacific Islander. He is not Black. Please stop making that statement. If you want to talk about how the community, the council, whomever decided to put these messages out there as value statements, you are confirming that you completely do not understand what is wrong with co-opting a message of pain. It is not your value statement. It is someone else's message. You did not involve any of these people in the discussion before that you could have. To listen to your staff today say, the problem is we don't have experts to turn to listen to Lynn Ware Peak say, we started this initiative and we learned, right, that we cannot have an ally leading it. We have to have someone who represents these views, not just as values, but lives this. You have chosen to not involve these people. You have chosen to make decisions as white people, to turn to other white people. Anybody with any kind of curatorial experience would have known what was going on that street, would have known about the potential political implication, would have thought to call our police chief and alert him, especially given the violence down the street. So please do not sit here and continue to communicate about your values and how, yes, Sarah's right. Okay, these things don't go perfectly. I had many contentious conversations with Sarah after George Floyd was murdered and racial justice and all of it really kind of came to a head across the country. They were not comfortable conversations, right? We are not all at the same place. And if you guys could maybe step back for just 1 second and acknowledge that you have no responsibility leading this discussion and no responsibility taking action on it until you consult with the people that do, I think we would be in a very different place. It is almost a year later, and to have an apology come from our city manager at this point. But to have Tim Henney say, "Oh, I'm so sick of having this discussion. People don't understand." Like, it's such a problem for you guys to explain to the community. And so I'll go back to you again, Max Doylany, when you say that it's not fair to say that there's an issue with the murals and an issue with.
We're not going to tolerate personal attacks here. So if you want to keep it
I'm
broad
responding,
language-
Andy, I'm responding to comments. Okay, so Max says it's not fair to attack the process. There was no process. You guys made no effort to engage the people that you should have. That is clear.
Not to be personal, you continue it, we're cutting you off.
Thank you. Eric, have one more comment from the arts.
Thank you.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, this is Jocelyn Scudder from the Arts Council for Park City and Summit County. My name has been brought up a lot in this conversation, so I figured I would just speak up quickly in response to some of the public comment and the discussion. Of course, we were deeply involved in this project, and we haven't talked about it a lot recently. And I do appreciate Angela and Sarah's comments in regards to the project, and to provide a little bit more context. And I do not appreciate the accusation that we led LJ in a direction to identify for a certain race. Our charge was to facilitate a racial equity mural series, and we had this huge opportunity to provide BIPOC artists a platform to express themselves during a very upsetting time after the death of George Floyd and other unfortunate instances. And so, we were contacted to produce a series of murals and help facilitate them. And we brought some artists to the table. And, an important thing that we wanted to talk about too was what does diversity look like in our own community? And that's one of the reasons why we intentionally invited Latino and Latinx artists to produce murals, in addition to Bill Lewis, who is a Samoan Pacific Islander, and Alj, who is a Samoan Pacific Islander. They acted as their own representatives as they talked through what racial equity meant to them and what messages they wanted to share with the Utah community. And so as we collected input from Utah artists who were from this BIPOC community, they collaborated together and came up with this series of murals that spoke to each other, that connected to each other. And it's interesting the way it happened, because initially LJ actually was going to do a beautiful portrait of George Floyd's mother. I remember he was telling me about the concept. And it was going to be this mural of her face, blue with flowers, all going down the street. And it was going to be more symbolic about George Floyd's death. And then when he found out that other artists were planning to put words in their murals, he said he wanted them to be consistent, especially from an aerial view. And he said, Jocelyn, if I really get to the bottom of what I'm trying to convey through this mural by doing a portrait of George Floyd's mother, it's about the Black Lives Matter movement. And he decided to write Black Lives Matter and adjusted his proposal. And this was a last minute change. As an arts council, again, we aim to amplify artists' voices, and we made a call and told the city that we were working with that, they had changed their mind, and our stance was to not censor artists. I will admit that if we had more diversity, maybe on the planning committee, there may have been feedback, but in that case, we've seen a lot of Samoan Pacific Islanders come out in support of Black Lives Matter. And I know that was his intent, showing support. So I guess, I don't know. I find when I tell that story to people who want to dig deeper into the process of the murals, I wanted to share that because I believe it does provide context. And really, we aimed to amplify BIPOC artists' voices who were dealing with a lot of trauma during that time. And this is across all races, I believe, in addition to Black African Americans. So I hope that provides a little bit more context and insight into how we curated the murals. And, again, there's a lot of things that we could have done differently, but I wanted to share that story. So thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, Jocelyn. Anyone else? Okay. we'll end the public input, and I just, council, I'm of the belief that these conversations need to be civil, that we want to hear all voices, but personal attacks cross the line. There was a warning and I cut it off, and if anybody's uncomfortable with that, or you are collectively, let me know and I won't do it again, but I'm just trying to keep these meetings civil. Okay.
Try to bring it home here. No, to be fair, Jocelyn sort of did it for me because she compounded our element, hopefully, of learning from this, a sense of humility. I will unequivocally say, if there's a pound of flesh, it should be mine. We would absolutely do it differently. We have learned from this. Jocelyn said that she would do certain things differently, and so that's the second part. We will learn just like we do when we make trips or missteps or falls, or we need to add process into things, but we would clearly do some things differently. Communication, the outreach, there are elements of this that fundamentally we would do differently, and I'm responsible for that. And then I love what Steve said, and this dovetails on what Angela said too, is that, we represent everyone. We represent everyone, whether they agree with this initiative or that initiative or this policy. And so we want to be an inclusive place where everyone has a seat at the table, and those voices are important. And we want to make them comfortable, feeling heard. Not everyone needs to be in agreement, but we represent everyone, and we have to do that meaningfully, authentically. And so we'll continue to endeavor to do that. So bring it home. Pound of flesh is mine. We would absolutely do it differently if we could, but we represent everyone, and I appreciate Steve for saying that, and reminding us, because it's really important, whether they agree with the direction we're headed or not, and we mean that. And that's the reason we do so much for public engagement. That's the reason we're predictable. I mean, when I went back to my notes from where I started, remember some of the adjectives we were saying were emotional, complex, personal, divisive, frustration, anger, distrust. And then, government's supposed to be stable, consistent, predictable, slow. I mean, dare I say slow? So sometimes those things are an absolute contradiction. And when you're feeling you're in that area of contradiction, it's hard. It's a little messy and it can be uncomfortable. So I thank you for having the courage to have this conversation and to hear from Angela and the others that have concern and dissent, because we want to hear from everyone. So thank you. But we do have several other items that we put a lot of work into, and that are really, really important to us too. And I think the team's ready to prepare, so we're ready to move on. I think the next group is ready to go, unless.
I'm going to suggest we take a 5-minute break while they set up.
Okay.